Okay, so who did what again? We'll stick around to the end because we've got a classic finish to this World Cup match between Magnus Carlsen and Gukesh. Just scintillating, tense chess of the highest quality. Now, Carlsen was playing with the black pieces, Gukesh with white, mouth-watering encounter, and already the opening is exciting here. So we get d4, knight f6, and bishop f4, the London system from Gukesh, playing it against a man who knows his London. But wait, look at Magnus's time. He spends 5 minutes on this move. He's out of book. No, he's just thinking about what to play, right? And he goes for an offbeat system with pawn b6, not fighting for the centre. Now, Gukesh goes knight c3. Normally, you see this pawn triangle, classic London pawn structure. This kind of setup is known as the Jabava London system, named after Badur Jabava, who played it a lot. Now, why is Gukesh doing this? Well, he's going for a quick central advance. So bishop b7 from Magnus, and now f3. So going hard for e4, taking the centre, and Magnus now still doesn't fight for it. He's playing with fire, and after e4, he makes another pawn move, pawn to a6. What's that all about? Well, he wants to stop knight b5, pressuring this pawn, forcing something nasty like knight a6 or whatever. Now we see queen d2, and it's really aggressive stuff from Gukesh. He wants the castle queenside. Let's blow the former world champion off the board. Now finally Magnus fights for the centre, and how many of us are playing e5 here, especially in a blitz game or anything, right? Just a classic looking move, drive back the knight, and it's definitely playable. It's a good move, it's just a different pawn structure. Black's going to go for c5, but Gukesh, he castles the king. He's got something completely different in mind, and this is a pawn sack if Magnus wants to take it. And Magnus burning time out of the opening here. Now Magnus didn't, as you can see, the board's gone light grey. This is analysis mode. Why not? Well, after captures, if you win that pawn, there's this silent killer move of queen to e3. Now you hit the bishop. Say it retreats to that starting square it came from. Looks very natural. Well, when you moved that queen, you opened up this rook and you lined up the queen with the king. So d5 is very powerful. You can't take with the queen, of course, you're going to lose your queen. You can't take with the pawn. And if you take with the bishop, well, c4 is a killer. That piece is actually dropping off. It's pinned to the queen, of course. So this is why the pawn wasn't captured. You know, there's a few different variations, but that's the basic theme. Don't rip open the position when your king's not castled. So Magnus goes for bishop to b4, developing, preparing to castle, and now Gukesh once again could play e5 to take the pressure off the centre, which this bishop is adding to. But instead, he goes for pawn to a3, inviting Magnus to chop. Queen recaptures and then letting his centre crumble. Now he's attacking this c7 pawn with bishop and queen, as we can see, but Magnus doesn't play a passive move like pawn to c6, or else white can continue with bishop d3 or queen e1, some kind of move to hold the centre together, and is doing well. So Magnus correctly takes on e4, and now Gukesh's follow-up is explosive. So if you take this pawn immediately, the problem now is black can go queen d5. And you blockade this d pawn, you also keep an eye here. And if white tries bishop c4 to dislodge the queen, you can come to g5 with check. Black's doing okay, but it's all holding on by a thread. So instead of taking immediately, Gukesh goes for pawn to d5, really blowing open all of the pieces here. Now I had all the lines actually worked out to click right, and the bloody thing crashed, so I'm going to have to show you them from scratch. But here's what's going on. If you take with the bishop, now you're running into trouble with bishop takes on c7. you hit the queen, and after it slides away, there are now two pieces attacking this square. So white can take this pawn, and if bishop takes, well, the rook crashes down, you have to give up the queen. And if knight takes here, well, now this queen takes on g7. The moment the knight moves, that's what you run into. This is the problem. And if you do queen f6, theme of which we see in the game, well, this time white can capture, knight recaptures, and pawn to c4 drives back the bishop, and this time you win a rook. Oh, actually, some of my lines are still here. Good, okay. Anyway, so that's the problem with taking with the bishop. The knight takes in the game. If you go with the pawn, well, this time you get a line like this. White picks up that pawn, and although the black centre looks impressive, it's actually going to crumble soon, and white's doing a bit better here. Bishop pair on an open board. So coming back here, bishop takes, not working. Pawn takes, no good. So Carlsen goes knight takes, best move. He's hitting both of these pieces, and so queen takes on g7 is the only follow-up, and Carlsen also finds the only follow-up of queen to f6. So he defends the rook through this x-ray on the white queen, and he hits this bishop, threat to take with check. So the queens are coming off the board, that one's forced, and now you can take here immediately, although then knight beats d7, maybe the black king gets castled. So Gukesh flicks in bishop to e5 to stop the king castling because it comes to defend the knight. If you go with this knight, by the way, it's a blunder. There's a tactic here. Do pause if you want to look for it, sharpen up the tactics. So the move white can play is rook takes on d7. If king takes, your knight drops. You've got 2 minors for the rook. That's good. If knight takes, you pick up the rook. So king e7 forced to defend this knight. Now the bishop takes on c7, knight bd7, and here Gukesh already drops back his bishop. Because if you take this pawn, the problem is you're activating this knight. It jumps in, it's now threatening a fork, and if you go knight h3, well, everything's getting really ugly. The rook's coming to the g-file, not the way to develop. So instead, bishop g3 on the board. Magnus goes rook h to g8, but the g-file is now blocked, and so bishop e2 can be played. Magnus delaying on the capture, by the way, because it's more awkward actually for black not to capture, force white to, don't help white harmoniously develop. And now a great move by Magnus, just prophylaxis of the highest quality. He goes king to e8, inviting this captures. Eventually Gukesh has to get this knight out, and now after knight takes, well, there's no bishop h4 check stuff. He's the one now picking up tempos on pieces, and Gukesh has got a nasty decision now. How do you hold on to everything? So he goes bishop to f3, but he's now dropping his bishop pair on this open board, and after takes, Magnus is slightly better in this endgame. Now Gukesh has got a decision. He takes with the pawn. If he captures here, we get a very similar endgame. So rook a7 takes here. Where are we? Rook takes on b7. This one drops. This is where I've lost the line that I had already stored. And this is the kind of endgame you get, where we've still got the same pawn structure. 2 pawns for black against 1 over here. 2 on 3 on this side. Plus the 2 rooks, the knights. It's very similar to the game. What we got in the game was a capture here. So this is the way that Gukesh decided to play, not taking this bishop. Now we get captures, knight takes rook takes on h7. We get this liquidation, but Magnus doesn't actually win this pawn straight away because there's a nasty trick for white, which is knight to e5. Because if this knight takes, then you run into this skewer and you pick up the rook, you're in exchange ahead. And you don't want to allow this knight to activate, be on that pawn, be on the knight with the rook, everything like that, not good. So instead, king to e7 is played, stepping away from this tactical idea, and now knight d4 comes on the board. Again, there's some nasty ideas of checking down here, activating all the pieces, and so instead of grabbing a pawn, Magnus plays the best move of knight to e5. He activates his knight, covers this square, covers the f7 pawn, but what are you doing after it's attacked? Because you don't want to be moving it. Then knight f5 check can be coming, picking up the rook, because that pawn would be pinned the moment the black knight moves. So Magnus, he counterattacks with rook to g4, and Gukesh can find nothing better here than to let the knights drop. It is the best continuation, and we enter into this endgame where, yes, the material's level. There was a threat to mate here, by the way, so c3 gives room. But the problem here for the white position is that this pawn here, the e pawn, is a passed pawn. This one's under more severe pressure than the f pawn, and these two pawns here, they keep these ones at bay just a little bit better. So watch how the game unfolds. Rook g8, pawn b4, b5, great demonstration of how two pawns can keep three at bay. And after king b3, we see one of the problems here, which is you want to go c4, but anytime you do it, you're running into rook g3 check, and then the pawn drops once the king retreats. Or if you block with a rook, then the g pawn drops. Big problems for Gukesh. So rook f g4 played, rook f2, rook 8 g7 now interrupts this attack, and even with a pair of rooks off the board, the problems persist. You know, you can't go c4, rook g3 check, king goes, you win the pawn, rook blocks here, you win this pawn, or sorry, take first, then win the pawn, you know, all these problems. So Gukesh pushes the a pawn, keeps the king blocked by the c pawn. We get pawn f5 from Magnus, takes here, now rook a2, and this is actually a decisive mistake from Gukesh. Now the computer wants c4 here, but this is bonkers, right? Because you're walking into check, and now if the king goes, okay, we're winning a pawn as said, that's terrible. So the computer wants to go rook f3, now check takes, king recaptures, rook takes here, and it says if you go rook b3, this can potentially be held, king d6. But, you know, this is some craziness here. To a human player, giving those two pawns, plus this one's a bit further ahead, just doesn't look sensible. I mean, if you go b5 here, for example, you just lost the game, apparently, after rook g4 check. So in this position, you have to go rook d3 check, apparently. So to a human player, just giving up that pawn doesn't look logical. So Gukesh goes rook a2, now rook g5, sorry, from Magnus, preparing to meet this with this, laterally defending the pawn. Again, it was the computer's favourite way to play, but it involves a pawn sacrifice. So Gukesh goes for the more human check, the king comes up, now he comes back to a2, covering this pawn, and he's getting way down on time here. f4 from Magnus, you know, 1 minute 45 now for Gukesh. We see rook c2, rook g3, and it's a miserable endgame. The king moves away, preparing c4. But after king e5, Gukesh doesn't even execute on it, because if you go down this route, now we get captures, you've lost the pawn, and if you take, what's the line here? Sorry, then you lose this pawn. If you come behind, preparing to push, well, now the king marches across, something like this, and there are various different lines where you start pushing away the white rook. What was the line I looked at here? Yeah, so c3 is the top line. Where does the rook go? Say it comes to b3 to stay with this pawn. Now there's king c4, I mean b6, the whole thing's brutal. Oh, and now there's a check. Okay, where's the king going? Okay, you have to stay with the rook. c2, okay, this one's going through first. Had my lines ready, lost them, sorry. But you can't go c4, it's just not working. So we get king b2, Gukesh just waiting around now. Magnus brings in the king, and this is instructive. He even ditches a pawn now. Gukesh does win his queenside pawn, but look how advanced Magnus's have got. The king comes all the way in, we get pawn e2, and now here, Gukesh actually resigns the game. It's not showing this on the left-hand side, usually does. Don't know what's going on with chess.com today, but if you come behind and check, then the king marches in. Yes, you can give another check, but ultimately this king comes all the way around, it's going through. And if you go king c2 to come round to the pawn like this, then don't make a queen, that would be stupid, you skewer, you lose your queen right, but what you can do instead is play rook e3, and this one's nice, because if check, king goes, you can take here, forced, or else the queen promotes, but after this one captures, look at the barrier those two pawns form. That's awesome. The pawn's going through, making a baby girl, and that's the game. So this is the final position. Who did it again? Magnus Carlsen. What did he do? Well, grind out an endgame that just looked fairly level, but he did his thing, made his opponent crack, and he goes 1-up in the 2-game match. Gukesh has got it all to do tomorrow with the black pieces as well. I hope you enjoyed. Do subscribe to never miss a future video, and see another epic game of chess, check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.